I think it's just so easy to look back on a younger version of yourself and think about all the mistakes that we've made and think, oh my God, I didn't know better. Or like, if I knew then what I knew now. But rarely do we talk about the decisions that we made at that age that actually made all the difference. And lately I've been kind of like reflecting on like my 20s as I, move further into my 30s. And I did a lot of things right. There were so many decisions that I made that to this day I look back on and I'm like, yeah, I fucking ate with that. Everything from like my tattoos to going natural to breakups and how I even navigated college. Like there were just a lot of things that I did right off of intuition alone. And I'm really proud of myself. And I think that I'm ready to stop being that person that constantly beats herself up and ready to move into an era of actually being proud of the things that I do right and celebrating the things that I've done right in the past. So in order to celebrate my 20-year-old self, I'm going to recreate one of my favorite makeup looks ever that I used to wear all the time when I was that age, and I kind of stopped doing it. And recently I stopped by at Ulta and found a makeup palette that was literally something I totally would have gone for at that age, and I bought it. And I was like, oh my God, like this is something that I used to love, and I don't know why I stopped doing it. And I guess that's kind of the thing with makeup trends is we moved into very muted colors. We moved into like a lot of matte products, and we've kind of lost the glow and the shine. And when I was 20, I was all about sparkle and shine and glow. And it wasn't very popular back then either. 2016 was hard for a lot of people visually. It was not that way for me. Like I looked great in 2016, I have to say. So this photo, honoring the Paisley again, is a photo. This was actually probably 2013, if I had to do the math. But this was a really interesting year. Like I was embracing my natural hair. I was in college. I was probably a sophomore or junior in college at this point. And I was really feeling myself. This was before my first tattoo. And I was just coming into my own and figuring out my style, loving my hair, loving my body for like the first time ever, and just really found my first set of confidence, like as a human being, since being a little girl. Like I feel like all kids are confident, but like then somewhere in middle school and high school, other kids, adults, pastors who slut shame you, like kind of convince you that you're not good enough one way or another. So we're bringing it back. We're celebrating this look. I'm going to recreate it, but with a few changes. And I'm going to talk about just all the things that I did at this age that I'm really fucking proud of. Okay, so like the biggest thing when I was 20 is the fact that I was literally in school full time and working full time. Like I literally was working 6 days a week. And, even back then I was like, college is really not for people who have to work. Like it's exhausting. And I just remember spending a lot of time being exhausted and feeling like, damn, like it's really not supposed to be this way. But it was really the only way that I could afford to go. My mom was, there's no cute way to say this, but she was very, very abusive. And it wasn't an option to stay home and commute to college. I went to Georgia State University and I majored in sociology. And I went to Georgia State for one reason and one reason only, which is that I knew that Georgia State had a really amazing network in Atlanta, and that I would be able to basically move out as soon as possible. And that's exactly what I did. So I just had that foresight even at that age that, finding my independence and making sure that I didn't end up back home with my abuser was like the top priority. And, the crazy thing is my mom said that she would, so I was living in this like student apartment called Westmar. If you know, you know. Back then, each room was $550 per month, which for a room at that time was just like, girl, it's a room. But it gave me, something, a place to live, because the dorms were really expensive. Like dorms were oddly more expensive than like the average apartment in that area. So we lived in Westmar, and it was like a great transition point because I didn't have to be like thrusted into like the real world too fast, but it functioned like a regular apartment with amenities. It was just that you knew that all the other residents were also college students, and they only leased out to college students. So there was a shuttle that would go to school. It was actually like really clutch. And then after that apartment, I just moved into a regular apartment. But my mom was supposed to pay for that, like, because they had a thing where you could pay by semester, and my mom just never paid. And I just remember having this weird feeling that I would have to pay for my own rent. And this was before I ever had my own job, but I was like so focused on getting a job because I was like, just in case my mom decides to like completely shit the bed to force me back home, let me get a job so that I can at least be prepared to pay my rent. I wasn't even expecting to have to do it, but I was like, just in case, because she let me live there under the condition that it was cheaper than the dorms. And they were a lot cheaper than the dorms. So I said, okay, but it wasn't associated with the school. And knowing my mom and how she kind of calculated everything, I was like, okay, this is the perfect opportunity for her to pull the rug from under me and make me come back home. So I said, let me get a job. And I literally walked into like every single small business in that area and sent in my resume and like a letter of recommendation from Camp Big Heart, which was like the closest thing to a job I'd ever had because I was volunteering there in the summers. Ton of volunteer hours. I literally got an award for having the most volunteer hours out of my entire class. Crazy. And I got a job. Now we can talk about that job in a different video, but it was bad, but it paid my bills. And literally the first month's rent was due, and guess who was nowhere to be found? My mother. So I paid my rent, at 19 years old. And just to put things into perspective, literally rent was $550. I was getting paid. I was a hostess. That was my first job ever. Terrible. They did not train me. Anyway, that's another video. So I was a hostess, and I was getting, my first check was like $363. Right then I knew, because I was like, I didn't even get like a full check. I got one of those weird little like, you just started here and your hours aren't really baked in checks. So I knew, I said, okay, this is going to be enough to cover my rent. This is like 19-year-old math right here. This is 19-year-old math. And sure enough, all my checks were like $300 and something dollars. Sometimes they'd be, $400 if it was really busy. And that was enough to cover my rent. So I would literally pay for rent. I had a budget of $20 per week to go grocery shopping. And I am an amazing cook. I was an amazing cook even back then. And so I would go to the farmer's market by bus. And if you know anything about the DeKalb farmer's market, child, that was a 2-hour journey. If you know anything about MARTA, like, be afraid of me, because I have that dog in me for even making that trip every single fucking week with like an IKEA bag. And I would put all my groceries in my IKEA bag. And that would be my food for the week on top of like whatever they would feed us at family meal. And that's how I survived. Eventually though, I did kind of move up and started doing server assistant jobs and just other things like that. And that put me in a position where, okay, now I'm not so strapped and I'm getting $1,000 a month. And I was able to like get coffee and like, I just remember like I used to feel so guilty for buying like a $3 coffee because $3 was cutting into my grocery budget. Like I literally had enough for rent, the little utility bill that would come in, that who knows how they calculated that, and groceries. And so literally even just spending $5 on anything else was like, I'm overdrafting my account. Like it was just such a crazy time. And meanwhile, all of this, and I'm a full-time student taking like 15 credit hours. Like it was just such hard work. And I don't think I ever could do anything like that again. But I was just so determined to stay out of the house because I knew that no matter how hard I was working, no matter how difficult it was financially for me, and I didn't even perceive it as financial stress. I just thought, I'm a student. This is what students go through. This is not what students go through. It was financial stress. I was just like, well, at least when I come home, there's nobody there waiting to like beat my ass. There's nobody there trying to manipulate me. And what I didn't understand back then that I know now is really the biggest crime that my mom committed was like convincing me that my creativity was a waste of my energy. Imagine somebody convincing you that your number one gift to the world is like the worst thing you could do with your time. It took me a decade plus to unlearn that. And so, you know, one thing that I'm extremely proud of for myself is knowing enough to know that I had to get out of that household, and that regardless of what it took, I had to get away from my mom, because I was like, no matter what, this woman just wants to bring me down and wants to keep me wherever she's at, and I don't want to be there. I don't want to be there. And so I basically kind of saved my life, you know what I mean? And now we're no contact, which that's been a long time dream. We've been no contact for almost 10 years. And it's the best decision I've ever could have made for myself ever. That one took a little bit longer. I didn't go no contact until I was about 25. But literally the separation started. And it's a process to like get away from people like that. Because at that time I thought, okay, well maybe she's only like this because she's like responsible for me. Imagine, that's child logic. Maybe this person is only destroying my life because they brought me into this world and they're responsible for me. And maybe there's resentment there. Like when I tell you, I tried so many different ways to justify the way I was being treated and to maintain the relationship. Like all throughout college, I was trying to like have lunches and like repair our relationship, like because I thought it was even up to me. I thought like I was supposed to like repair the damage that was done. It took me even years to realize like the only person responsible for the damage in our relationship was her, and like I just needed a mom. You know what I'm saying? Like even that took like more like growing up to even figure that out. But what I knew at 20 years old was that I had to get out from that environment. I knew that much. I was like, let me just create some space and then we'll go from there. Let me just like be independent and then we'll go from there. And with each step of like gaining my independence and figuring out like myself and what I needed in order to be happy and healthy, I realized what the issue really was. And that was like kind of the most powerful thing. So school was really interesting. I started out as a chemistry major. If I could do the whole thing over again, if I had a completely different upbringing, I probably would have just majored in art or like fine arts, or I probably would have gone to SCAD. Like if I could just do the whole thing over again. Because the reality is I was an artist and there was no reason for me to not be pursuing that. But I was a chemistry major. Now I did love the STEMs. Okay. I loved like being curious about things, and I always thrived in my STEM classes. Like I thrived in biology and chemistry in high school. I took AP chemistry, I took AP bio. I loved the way science was taught. But when I got to college, I just saw like a bunch of burnt out people, men and women of every background, hating their lives. And I didn't like the job prospects. I didn't like, okay, if I'm going to be a chemist, who am I going to be a chemist for? You know what I mean? And I started thinking about that. And I started thinking about like, what is my life really going to be? And so I was like, this isn't it. Like as much as I love studying this stuff, I don't want to be in an environment. And that's the thing, when you grow up how I did, you realize how much environments matter. I was like, I don't want to be in an environment where I wasn't going to be around people who loved what they did. So I chose sociology. Talked to a couple of faculty members and I was like, you know what? Like, they just seem happier. Like, they just seem like they're more interested in teaching the subject matter. And so I literally just made like a gut decision and was like, I'm just going to do sociology. And that was literally the best decision I could have made. Sociology literally taught me how the world worked. It gave me language to process the racism that I experienced throughout my life that I didn't understand was racism. It taught me history, because history wasn't really taught the way that it needed to. It taught me critical thinking. I mean, literally sociology homework would be like, read these 3 pages out of this like very dense like philosophical book. And you're like, no problem, I can do that. You get to class, you thought you read something, and then you find out that your understanding of it was way off base. And we would have these really in-depth conversations about what we just read. And your participation in the class, and of course there were lots and lots of papers. Your participation in the class was really what was conducive to your success. So it ended up being like a really rigorous major because it just forced you to think so critically. And there was no way that you could kind of like fudge it. Like with the STEM classes, you could just bury your head in the books, memorize. But with sociology, you had to really learn something. Like you had to really like process that information and come out on the other side transformed. And that was something that the other majors didn't really like expect out of you. So it was actually really rigorous, but it was perfect for me. And unfortunately, my GPA never recovered from those first couple of semesters where I was a chemistry major, then a biology major, but and it did delay my graduation. It took me 5 years to graduate instead of 4. But I did graduate with sociology, and I took a ton of anthropology classes. So I did have a concentration in anthropology and gender studies. So I'm really, really glad I did that. To this day, that's very much so the ethos behind everything that I do now. Just as a creative, I'm really obsessed with like Black women's experience. Like there's this project that I did years ago called the Black Women's Happiness Project that I kind of want to bring back in the form of like a documentary or something like that, where I was literally just interviewing Black women and being like, what do you think it takes for you to be happy? Just such a simple question that always has like profound depth to it, because a lot of women just didn't consider happiness to be something that was on the table. You know what I mean? Like it was crazy. So one of the best decisions I could have made, and I think I had by the time I was 20, I was already a sociology major. So that was something that I'm very proud of for myself for making that decision. Like very much so stepped out on faith. like very much so. Didn't know where it was going to take me, but I just knew that I needed that experience. And I was like, I need to be held. And I felt the sociology department. I was like, these people are going to hold me. And that's where I finally got mentorship. Like, one of my professors was like, she literally sat me down and peeled back her finances for me and was like, this is how much I make. This is where I get my income. This is how much I'm probably gonna make in the next 5 years. And this is what it requires to like be a functional adult. Nobody else sat me down like that. Like, she was the only person who really did that. And like, literally, I'll never forget that. You know what I mean? That happened in the sociology department. So a lot of times people get so obsessed with like picking the right major for the market, when really you need to pick the major based on the type of transformation that you think you need at that stage in your life. Because you'll never be 20 something at that time, at that place with the state of the industry is in. Everything is going to change. So you have to ask yourself, like, what am I missing right now developmentally at this stage in my life, and where am I going to get that? And that should be your college experience, because it's really just going to be a place for you to grow as a person anyway. So you might as well treat it like that. You know what I'm saying? So that was kind of my approach, and that was absolutely the right approach. At this age, I also broke up with my then longtime boyfriend, who was very financially abusive. So something else that like I didn't realize was how, even though I escaped my mother, like how like these dynamics of manipulation would show up in my life in other ways. So it showed up in my relationships. I learned my lesson there. That was probably the last partner I had that really was like manipulator like that. But then it would show up at work. Like, I literally had to go through all the areas of my life to be like, oh, here you go again. And to be fair, these types of people are low-key everywhere. Like, and you know, we live in a capitalistic society, and that type of behavior is rewarded. You know what I mean? So it was just like, damn, like being able to spot it, like it's actually kind of ridiculous that I should even have to like be so good at interpreting like behavior, but I had to learn like, oh, like this is an opportunist, or this is someone who is trying to make me feel small because they feel small, or this is somebody who feels threatened by me, and I have to be very careful about that, right? Like that takes a lot of time, and I'm to this day, and maybe that's another video, but to this day I'm still learning how that can show up. But there's this TikToker that I absolutely love. She's this lesbian woman from Jersey, and she's very popular. You probably know her. She's the one who popularized that big rant about Markelly's. I can't remember her name right now, but she sat down, one of her few serious videos, and she sat down and said her mom told her that when someone shows up in your life when you're down, that's not God's timing, that's predatory timing. And that rocked me, because literally that's my mom's move. That was like my ex's move. Like all these people, like my like bosses, like people who show up strategically when you have nothing, like you have to watch them, because why are you here? You know what I mean? It's predatory timing. So versus somebody who was always there for you when you were up, always celebrating you, and just continuing to do that, knowing that you're not going to stay down for long. That's a very different energy. So I'm very proud of the woman that I've become. This is the look, a little updated, you know, a little bit more refined, but I'm really proud of the decisions that I made at that age. And it laid the foundation for me to be able to live the life that I have now. So thank you to Pass Me.